Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we'll be discussing the local election results and asking will this have a bearing for the general election in 2 years' time, and we'll also be discussing Keir Starmer's trouble with Beergate. Can he survive as the leader of the Labour Party? And as Christians, what should our response be to these political developments that have occurred over the past week? And in this programme, I'm joined today by Tim Dieppe, who is Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, together with Alistair Scott, the UK Director of Joseph Storehouse or Vision for Israel. So guys, warm welcome to the programme. I'll start off with you, Tim. Can you just give us an update on some of the issues that you've been working on with Christian Concern? Because firstly, I'm always grateful for you coming on this programme. I'm also extremely grateful for the incredible work that Christian Concern does to defend our Christian freedoms in the UK. And I dread to think what kind of mess we'd be in if you guys weren't there on the front line.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, well, in terms of policy work, we've been two big focuses, really. One is at-home DIY abortions, which we campaigned very, very heavily on. The government did actually announce they're going to bring an end to it, but then sadly there's an amendment that passed in the House of Lords and then passed again in the House of Commons as well that will make that permanent. So that's very disappointing news, but we're still going to carry on fighting the corner in that one. And conversion therapy and all of that is the other big policy issue we've been campaigning on. But in terms of legal things, we've had a few really good wins, and the most recent one is Keith Waters, who won a case for tweeting, and the school that he worked at complained and dismissed him in the end, and he won a case for discrimination there, which is really encouraging. So we've had a few good legal wins this year to date, which we're very encouraged by.
Excellent. And Alice, it's good to see you again. It was nice to share a platform with you in Bournemouth at the Pool Theatre, the Lighthouse Theatre there as well, a night to honour Israel, which is good. So share with us some of the work being done by Vision for Israel / Joseph Storehouse.
Well, it's always been testing through the past couple of years with not being able to have so many meetings. So it's great to have the recent one where we were sharing the platform together. But, even though we haven't had as many conferences, seminars, gatherings as we were doing 2.5 years ago, we're still getting the message out by using technology, using the Zoom calls and so on. And so we're very involved still and getting invited into churches, even into some of the more Anglican churches are kind of interested in asking about how our relationship should be with the land of Israel and the people of Israel. So yeah, the work continues. It's different for me, at my age, using technology that I didn't know existed is kind of challenging, but it's great. You really adjust to everything and take those opportunities, because it's an important message we have to share that are to the churches, but also generally to those who are not in the church, our politicians as well, that we should be understanding and actually doing something about building our relationship with Israel as a government, as a nation which is a democratic chosen government. So it's an important time for us.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. And Tim, what do you make of the local elections that occurred last week? Apparently 200 councils were up for election. Labour gained 11 but lost 6 councils. The Liberal Democrats control 3 more councils. The Conservatives lost 487 councillors and 12 councils, but gained 1 and won the mayoral race in Croydon. And we see also the Greens increased their councillors by 80. And I suppose the big story is that Sinn Féin became the biggest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. So what do you make of last week's polling? And is this any indicator of the direction that we could see in the forthcoming general election in 2 years' time?
Yeah, well, obviously Labour are celebrating their wins in London, where they took a couple of councils there in London. And that's their positive thing. But outside London, it's surprising how poor Labour really did, actually. They didn't get that many new seats, let alone new councils outside London. In fact, they didn't win as many new seats as the Lib Dems or the Greens did, in fact. And that's very surprising, given the poor popularity that Johnson has, with all the issues around the party and all of this kind of stuff, and the economy being bad as well. And inflation and cost of living crisis, all this kind of stuff. You'd have thought an opposition party ought to be making a lot out of that and also making big gains. And the fact they didn't, even in red wall areas as well, I think is a very poor show for Labour, actually. And I'm very surprised that they didn't do better in that. And what it does indicate is perhaps a bit of a comeback for Lib Dems, actually, who've been very, very weak lately, and then they've done well. I mean, they have normally done a bit better, I think, in local elections than in mainstream elections, but you know, they have done well out of this one, and we'll see if Lib Dems come back as more stronger force going forward in this.
And I know that critics within the Conservative Party, Alistair, were saying that if Boris gets a bad elections result in these elections, then he has to go. I mean, he's almost like a cat. He's got 9 lives. He might be on his 8th life, but he keeps surviving, despite the fact that they lost 12 councils and 487 councillors. But is this a protest vote against the Conservatives? Do you think the British public are fed up with Partygate? They're fed up with the rising cost of living and inflation, and just trying to make ends meet, and this was just a warning shot to the Conservatives? Or do you think that this is the trend that we're going to see now, the decline of the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson, until the general election in 2024?
Well, I definitely think it's a warning shot for the Conservative government, and for Boris particularly. I know there's been talk about changing, having a shake-up in the cabinet and so on, but I think a lot of it also shows, as Tim's just been sharing, these results, they are midterm, and they are the public saying we're not happy with things. But then it's not that they're not just not happy with the Conservatives, they're not happy with politicians generally. There's a lack of confidence in truth, there's a lack of confidence in honesty. And I think for both sides of that, whether you're on the Reds or the Blues, this is like, you must start doing something more. You've got 2 years to the next election, and for Boris and the team and the Conservatives, they really have to have a rethink. They gained a lot of good points during the pandemic for all that they were doing to help business, and the furloughing scheme and all that sort of stuff, which has cost the nation a fortune, but it was the right thing to do, to keep people afloat, to keep people from losing their homes and everything else. But after that came all the scandals, or the suggested alleged scandals, and now they really do need to put their house in order on both sides, because I think for the Labour Party, as they've made it very clear by attacking Partygate and all the rest, and then suddenly the whole emphasis has changed towards them, and they need to have some good stories to tell, or else there's going to be shaking going on in their party too. So it's definitely a time of shaking for our politics.
And what do you think is that is switching voters off from actually voting for the Labour Party? Because like you said, Tim, that really the Labour Party should be 10, 15 points ahead in the opinion polls. They should have stormed this local elections as an indicator that they are a party ready for government, but they're clearly not, are they? Is it all the progressive policies that the Labour Party seem to be obsessed with that may be important within the Labour Party, but when it comes down to the electorate, they're not really interested?
Well, I worry about that and the direction of that. And when you've got politicians who can't answer a question about what is a woman and things like that, I mean, that's a lot of ordinary people are going to think, what on earth is going on with that kind of thing is there. And I think that Labour does lack a sort of clear policy. You know, what are their policies actually? What is their alternative? What are they actually proposing to do that's very different from the Conservatives? What would they actually do about immigration? What would they actually do about the cost of living and so on? I don't know. I'm not clear. I don't know. And if I don't know, most ordinary people won't know either. And I think they lack a clear sense of this is the alternative. We want to do it differently this way, and that's not getting across to the general public, I think.
And also we see that the Greens have done very well in terms of increasing their councillors to 80. We also see, for example, the Liberal Democrats have also gained 3 or more councils at this local election. Do you think we can see the Liberal Democrats being a force again, or are we going to see a complete no-show when it comes to a general election?
There's signs that they could be making a bit of a comeback, but I mean, it's happened in the past where they've done well in the midterm council elections, and then when it comes to the actual general election, their policies are a little bit like Tim was just saying about the Labour policies. They need to work on something definite. And the Green Party, we know what the Green Party stands for, so they're always going to have a section of the population who are going to be following them and voting for them. So, but it's probably quite a small percentage. But with the Liberals and the Labour, the challenge for them for sure is get your policies together, make them real. You know, you don't promise the earth when you can't do it, but make them real and make them palatable for us as the general public. So yeah, they've got 2 years, and really they need to get their policies out. As Tim says, we don't know really what the Labour are going to be doing. They at the moment they're just very good at, or both parties very good at criticising each other. But we need some definite policies for their way ahead, and then the general public can make a good decision based on what they can see, what the promises are. I mean, our politicians aren't got the best reputation of keeping their promises, but it's a good starting point at least.
Yeah, and Tim, we look at the Conservative Party. They have a 80-seat majority now, which is a massive majority. If a general election were held tomorrow, it would seem likely, wouldn't it, that they would probably hang on to power, but with a massively reduced majority. If there was a general election, because the general election is so different from a local election, because when there's the Ukraine crisis, there's the cost of living, was also just come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. People are, despite the character flaws of our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, are they really going to put that at risk by voting for, say, Kier Starmer as a possible?
Well, it doesn't look like it, does it, given the local election results as just sort of discussed. Labour didn't win a lot of seats out of this in spite of everything that's going on. So the indications are, yes, that Labour aren't putting up a strong enough alternative and a strong enough proposition that people want to vote for. So yes, it looks like probably the Conservatives would hang on there even if they'd lose a lot of seats. But it would be a bruising battle, definitely, if we had an election just now. There was a lot going on in the world, and a lot going on in this country as well, and a lot to talk about. But as we just discussed, we need to see some better policy proposals coming out from some of these alternative parties to see what we're actually voting for, see what they're actually proposing.
Absolutely. And politics is so interesting because, that famous expression that a week is a long time in politics is so true, because we now see that all that media pressure and spotlight that has been on Boris regarding Partygate, that pressure has been taken off for the moment. Now we see that Sir Keir Starmer is under that kind of spotlight and pressure, claiming that he was at a work meeting and yet they all had a takeaway curry, they were drinking beer, and according to some of the tabloids, those members of the Labour Party that were there were actually drunk. So there's no way that this was actually a work event. So then he's in trouble now, and he's saying that if the police fine him, the Durham police, then he'll resign as leader of the Labour Party. Is he doing this to try and say that he's got a higher moral compass and code than Boris, or is he just gambling his whole political leadership on this one issue, which means that if the police do fine him, then he will have to resign?
It looks that way, doesn't it? Because it was very easy to be taking shots at the Conservative government in the past, and the excuses they're using are exactly the same as Boris was using for month after month after month until the final results. That we haven't broken the rules, and it was just an office having a drink and a lunch, but more and more is being exposed day by day. So yeah, I think he's made it difficult for himself to survive. If they are fined, and if the police do come up and say, yes, you are just as guilty as Boris and the team were there. So I think, it's one of those tough ones. And again, I think it just breaks the public confidence in either side of the party, because they're all doing more or less the same things and accusing each other of doing it, and they are not doing it. But so we got to wait and watch. And I think even within the Labour Party, we've seen this week, there's been kind of people within the party who are saying, well, if he's fined and if he's found guilty, he has to resign. So if there's no unity within the team, he's got no other choice. And then the frightening thing is, who will replace him?
That's a good question. We'll come to that one later. And what are your thoughts, Tim? Has Sir Keir Starmer backed himself into a corner that he can't actually get out of now? That politically he's manoeuvred himself into such a position that if the police then do find him guilty and he gets a fine for breaking the kind of COVID-19 lockdown relegations, then he could be out, and surely this would then just open up a leadership contest, bring out all the old wounds within the Labour Party, and it would look to the electorate that Labour are completely unelectable.
Yeah. Well, I think all of this is about hypocrisy, isn't it?
Of course.
Boris, put together these rules and then disobeyed them, at least in one instance, and maybe more we'll see. And then, Kier Starmer couldn't resist saying, you've got to resign for disobeying rules, even for having a police investigation, you've got to resign. And of course now he's being investigated. And he supported these rules as well. He didn't make them quite the same way, but he supported them and wanted even stricter rules at certain points in the whole process. And so if he's found to disobey them, having said you must resign to Boris, it's very hard for him to say, oh, but I don't need to resign. So I think, he's reached the right conclusion that it was the only option open to him, really, I think, to say, I will resign if I'm found guilty of this. Angela Rayner, I understand, has also said that she will resign in that circumstance. You've got the Labour Party claiming they've got documentary evidence to say it was a work meeting after all, people carried on working afterwards. Well, we'll see. The police will have to go and look at all of that and see, and like you say, the reports about it not being very work-oriented at all. So we'll see, and we'll find out. And but of course, the other side of it is if they do get, there's two sides. If they don't get fined, then no doubt they'll be calling Boris to resign, right? Mm-hmm. If they do get fined and they resign, that will put a lot of pressure on Boris as well. Let's not ignore that, right? The Conservatives will think, how can we stand with a leader who won't resign, having been convicted when the other side did resign, having been convicted? How are we going to explain that on the doorsteps? I think that will be very, very difficult for Boris as well. So I think it's not easy for Boris, whichever way it goes on this, actually, as well as for Kier. And this, like you say, it's all about breaching trust in politicians and hypocrisy in politicians, and the whole thing. Just the ordinary person looks at it and thinks, stinking politicians, they're not doing what they say, and they're not obeying their own rules and all this kind of stuff, and that's really bad for the country generally.
Isn't one thing that the British public hate, though, and that's the issue of kind of hypocrisy, saying one thing and then doing another, and it opens up a whole big debate, I think, about integrity of our political leaders, and is this any surprising that really for a Bible-believing Christian to make any kind of progress in politics or get to the very top of the parties, they're hounded out of office? So is it any surprise that in our post-Christian society now, where we are having a political and a spiritual vacuum, we are not having the calibre of leaders that are required to do the job, that have character, that have integrity, that are truthful, that are honest? And this is really what the electorate want, but they don't want the people that actually represent this.
I think that's totally right, because I think generally the public don't expect people to be character-wise perfect, because we're all human. We realise that in our own lives. But I think what we've seen in my lifetime, I've seen politicians change. They've changed from people who were really committed to what they spoke and what they believed in to being sort of professional. It's a career. And they like the celebrity status that goes with it, and that's a kind of sad thing. And I think for the general public, they're beginning to see through it, and beginning to see that we're not getting any of the policies, any of the things that are right for the people. And so there is a loss of confidence in the integrity of people. And maybe it's a wake-up call for both sides. I'm not on one side or the other, but I want people to believe what they're saying, and I want to believe that what they're saying. And whether I agree with them or not is not the problem. If I can agree with them that they really believe what they're standing for, and not just looking for a way to keep in power and stay in politics, I think I reflect most of the public who are probably thinking the same way, thinking let's have your policies and do what you say. That's a biblical truth anyway, isn't it? Not just be a reader, but be a doer of the Word of God. And that's a challenge for politicians. If you are standing in a public position and you are representing your people, let's have the policies straight down the line. Let's believe in you believing in your policies, and then it'll begin to change. So I think it is a great shaking up, and I hope that by the coming election, or maybe the election after that, we'll see a more positivity from those who are in politics to actually stand for what they believe. That's definitely how it was in the 60s and early 70s, but it has changed into a professional workplace. And we need that to turn back. Let's have true policies and politicians who believe in their people.
Yeah, I think in politics everyone's a liberal, so they don't know what they believe in. And I mean, Tim, I mean, Christian Concern works with Christian parliamentarians. There are very few on there that are real Bible-believing Christians, really willing to stand up on the Christian issues of the day. Why do you think that's the case? And also, what can our viewers do to support those Christians who are standing in Parliament, who are not compromising? Because there are a handful of them.
There are some, like you say, and some of them are very brave and outspoken and courageous and don't compromise on these various things. But like you said, there aren't very many. I think that's kind of partly a reflection of the country, really. And maybe also partly a reflection of how many Christians really want to go into politics and get involved in what's become a bit of a dirty game, really. Oh, yeah. And it's quite difficult to get selected in some cases. But nevertheless, there are some, and God works miracles sometimes to get people into positions of influence. And that has definitely happened in some cases as well. So yes, you know, we need to pray for them, support them, encourage them. Do write letters to your MP about how to vote, because they do listen and it does influence them. And if they've got lots of people writing one way, they'll think about it again. So you know, do that as well. And do encourage Christians who work in politics, whether it's a local level or at the national level, because you need Christians in all the political parties influencing and getting a voice out for Christian views on things.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Alistair, I think some viewers watching this programme thinking like, oh, another politics programme, I want to switch off or turn channels. But as Christians, it's imperative, isn't it, to be involved in politics, because politics and politicians and our political leaders make the decisions that govern our lives. And when we live in a democracy like we do, and we have institutions of democracy like a free press, the ability to vote, democracy, we also have the right to assembly, freedom of worship. These are all kind of sacred institutions that each generation has to guard in order to pass on to the next generation. And if we don't, we'll lose them. And of course, we see then that we have a choice between living in a democracy and living in an authoritarian regime and another authoritarian regime. The right to share the gospel, the right to attend church, could actually cost you your life. So don't Christians need to wake up and realise that what's at stake is absolutely huge, and the only way that we can influence kind of righteousness at a governmental level is to actually get involved in politics and have our say and stand up for righteousness, so that we can see godly legislation have an impact on our society and upon our nation, and therefore we would have God's blessing rather than God's curse on us.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And many times I hear it amongst Christians that you know, we shouldn't be involved in politics, but it's an absolute nonsense, because even the Bible tells us, you know, that we should be praying for those in authority. All authority comes from the Lord, and He allows those who are in authority, and therefore our prayers are important. But also, like Tim was just saying, let's go and encourage those who we know are believers, because there's so much pressure on them I mean, there was the Liberal Democrat leader of a few years ago who actually resigned because he was being pushed into the corner of
Tim Farron.
He wasn't allowed to express his Christian beliefs. And so they are under a lot of pressure, and whether they're believers or not believers, they still need us as Christians in the public to go and see them, challenge them on things that are totally unrighteous. I mean, Tim's mentioned one or two things that have been fighting recently in Christian Concern. And we as Christians should know about these things and should be talking to our politicians and putting pressure. I remember talking to a politician once who said the reason that they go in a certain direction is not because they necessarily agree with it, but they get badgered, they get more press or more letters or communication on the negative than the positive. So they have to go with what is negative. And I think we as Christians, we need to answer. We need to fill that vacuum and actually go and talk to them and let them know that we are looking for righteous government, we're in righteous laws, and there's an awful lot of stuff going on out there which is totally unrighteous and totally ungodly. So please, as believers, as Christians, get involved with politics. You don't have to be a politician, but you can pray for them, you can encourage them, you can discourage them when they're going the wrong way. But be there to take that position. We have that place where we can make a difference if we choose to. So let's do it.
Thank you. That was sound advice and good wisdom. Thank you, Alistair. Down to about 3 minutes or left of the programme, Tim. Now, if we look stateside, we see the big debate versus Roe versus Wade over the issue of abortion. Now, what is important is the fact that Christians in America have made it conditional on support of the Republican Party that they stand against abortion. Isn't there something that we can learn from our cousins across the pond of how we engage with politics and make the issue of abortion a political issue?
Well, I think that's right. Yes, I think abortion has been very much in the forefront of the political debate in America. Christians ask their politicians, what's your stance on this? What will you vote? And they all know that, and they all know which way people would vote, and that's quite a big deal. Whereas here, it's kind of like relegated somewhat. You know, as I said, this DIY abortion amendment was passed in the House of Lords. There's only about 40 people present or something like that there, and then in the House of Commons as well, it was passed, and you know, it all sort of happened quite quickly. And again, because it's not such a big debate, people felt, oh well, what's so wrong with this? You know, let's just pass it through, kind of thing. Whereas if it was a much bigger debate in the public domain, then I think that people would have realised 1 in 17 women are ending up in hospital when they take these tablets and so on. This is not a safe thing. It's not the way we should be going with this. So I think that yes, there is scope for this to be upped in the political, in the political sphere, and more people talk about it. And I think we need to see that and let's badger politicians about these things and say, why did you vote this way and what were you thinking and so on. And we need to see something of a turnaround in this in the political arena.
Alistair, we're down to the last 2 minutes of the programme, so maybe this is a good time to kind of sum up of why Christians need to get involved in politics, why they need to support our Christian MPs who are really up against it because they are sometimes going against their own party whip to stand on biblical issues. It's not popular anymore to be a Christian, and we're certainly being marginalised. How important is it that we pray for them, we support them, but also other Christians get involved in these righteous issues that affect our nation?
Yes, absolutely. It's imperative, to be honest, because we are a minority in a way that actually stand up and for righteousness, for biblical truth. And there are many people out there who are far more loud in their voices. So we must take up every opportunity to share our faith and encourage those around us to make the right decision.
Excellent. So Alistair, Tim, thank you so much for being my guest on this week's Politics Today. And I want to thank you for watching this programme today. We need to pray for our politicians that they would have courage and conviction, and they'd be men and women of integrity. So thank you for watching this week's Politics Today.